Meanwhile, Sandra has actually been trying to help her husband become a legal citizen for 11 years. In 2006, she says her husband applied for asylum, but after many trips to a Boston courthouse, they were told no because he hadn't applied within his first year here. Then he applied for withholding from removal and the torture convention. Both were denied. Meanwhile, through appeals, Morales says they faced a number of different lawyers, some who didn't communicate with them, others who didn't communicate with the courts.
In 2013, Sandra says ICE agents came for her husband, but made a deal that he would be given a legitimate Social Security number if he helped them find the man who initially gave him the false one and plead guilty to falsifying work documents, a promise she says was not kept. Which leads us to questions about who is targeted by ICE agents and why. So we took them to Sean Newdower, who works in public affairs for the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office. He tells us that ICE officers are looking for specific people and often encounter others during their search. But what about the rumor that these agents are only concerned about those with a criminal history? The catch is, if you're in this country without the proper paperwork, you are technically breaking the law and therefore a person of interest to ICE agents. Newdower says in part, quote, while our officers do make criminal aliens a priority, they will not ignore other immigration violators, particularly those who have signed deportation orders from an immigration court, end quote. Amanda?
Okay, so knowing all of this, we still have questions. So we brought in an immigration expert. Sue Roche is the executive director of the Immigrant Legal Advocacy Project. So starting with this, if you do not apply for asylum in that first year, how much does that complicate this whole process?
It complicates it quite a bit. Unfortunately, for the asylum process, it is a really complicated process. It takes our attorneys over 100 hours to prepare those cases, and there is a one-year filing deadline requirement that many people don't know when they're new to the country and starting to apply. If you miss that one-year deadline and you can't meet some sort of extraordinary hardship or extraordinary circumstance exception, then you do have to meet that higher standard of withholding of removal that's not a path to permanent legal status.
So withholding of removal, something that Sandra mentioned they had applied for. What's sort of the process of even going through that?
Sure. Well, there's so many different processes of obtaining legal status. Asylum and withholding of removal have different standards. They're both for people who have a fear of persecution by their government. For withholding of removal, there's a higher level that you have to meet. But it basically is saying that you have a removal order, but we're going to withhold that removal order. You just have a higher standard that you need to meet, whereas asylum eventually can lead to permanent residency and citizenship.
It sounds like she has been trying for 11 years to get legal citizenship. Is that something that you've seen? Does it take a long time?
It does, and there are many different, a lot of times people think there's just one or two simple processes for gaining legal status. It's actually quite complex. There are different types of status. Many have many years wait. Sometimes it can get complicated. People apply on their own without an attorney, and they can make a mistake that can delay their cases many years. There are incredible backlogs right now. For example, someone applying for asylum has a 3 to 4 year wait for an interview with the Boston Asylum Office that has jurisdiction over cases in Maine. If they're in immigration court, they may be getting scheduled for a hearing in 2020 or 2021.
Now, if somebody's in waiting in that process, could they still be deported within that waiting period?
If somebody is in the process and they have a pending application, or if they are in immigration court, they can't get deported until they finish their process. For example, in asylum, we actually have signed a treaty that says that we won't deport somebody who has a well-founded fear of persecution until they have the opportunity to present their case to immigration authorities.
The situation here, he falsified a Social Security number. Is that something you see a lot of? Obviously someone is new to the country, they aren't completely aware of what to do around here.
Right.
What do you normally see?
Yeah, if you think of somebody who gets here who may be arriving from a really dangerous situation, they need to survive. So they're going to need to work. And if they don't have an immediate path to legal status, or they're not aware of that, in immigration you don't get a court-appointed attorney, so somebody may not have an attorney they can afford to navigate their path through the complicated processes. So sometimes people do use documents that others have given them. Sometimes they don't even realize that they're not valid, and sometimes they work without documents. But it's certainly something that people sometimes do in order to survive and support themselves and their families.
All right, Sue Roche, thanks for coming in and answering some questions.
Sure.